Yes, here it is. Happy Friday. I'm so glad you're here today. It's January 15th, 2021. And today we will read, imagine, and activate prior knowledge, right? Just that habit of stopping and thinking before you read. Hey, what is this about? Oh, it's that kind of a story. Oh, okay. I know what this is like. I've read this kind of thing before. This reminds me of something. When you create that connection to your memory, right, it makes it so much easier to imagine and dramatize it, act it out in your mind. And that's what's going to make reading memorable. So I will create a movie in my mind, and then once we're done with that, of course, I'm going to finish my research and turn that sucker in so I don't have to worry about it over the weekend. For our close, it's one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King. What does this quote mean to you? And I don't necessarily mean what's your definition of it. What's the importance of it? What does it really mean to you? And it's not quite the same thing, if y'all get what I mean. So if you have an idea of how this personalizes to you and your life, or to people that you know, be sure and put that into the discussion. So here's the quote. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And that's a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So why is he so important? Why did the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, declare an official holiday in his name? And a big part of it is the way he did things so differently. He talked about Christian ideals, but you don't have to be a Christian. There are lots of other religions that understand the power of forgiveness and doing what's right, regardless of how you feel. And he created that way of thinking, of passive resistance. You know what? I am not gonna fight you, but I'm also not gonna go along and do what I'm told, like I have no other choice. And being able to disagree and not get angry and fight to the death is something that a lot of us need to learn in this country on both sides of the political spectrum. So learning how to think that way, I think, is important. And he has a lot to teach us today because well, you know what? Let's just watch the video and look into it. But before we do that, let's do our positive affirmations. Tell ourselves how to think and how to act positive on purpose. Say it with me out loud or in your head. What are you? I am strong, confident, and successful. Yes, we are. And how do you feel about reading? I love reading. It's so much fun. Yeah, and the better you get at it, the more that's true, right? And how do I feel about schoolwork? The harder I work, the stronger I become. Alrighty. So there's a great video here. It's less than 5 minutes long. Let's go ahead and watch that. But first, let me switch it. Okay. So like I was saying, I think that shows real quick, all the things that he accomplished. And the big thing was the idea of nonviolent resistance. People kind of don't understand the importance of that. And, if anybody has read in the Bible, they talk about how Jesus says that to turn the other cheek. And most people misunderstand that. My father did when I was a kid. And he said, if people are being rude to you, you just turn the other cheek. And he meant ignore them. And the real meaning behind it is saying that, if somebody slaps you in the face, what should you do? You should turn the other cheek and let them slap you again. And that's the kind of thinking behind this. Remember, he was a pastor. That if I am sitting there calmly and respectfully, and I go into your restaurant or wherever, or on your bus, and say, you know what, I have money, I want to buy food, sell me some food. And if they're being ugly and hateful to you, well, it shows how bad they are. It says nothing but good about you. So in all these situations, the people that Martin was leading, acting calm and kind and doing the right thing, no matter how they were treated, really made a difference. And it showed people how ugly they were and how good King and the people protesting were. So that was a big part of what made a difference in how things changed. And that's about what we're going to be talking about here in the reading that we're going to do. If you go into today's work, of course, you will see the discussion. What does the quote mean to you? And then the MLK Day reading and video. If you wanted to watch the video, it's linked here. You can see it again if you want to. And then you can either read here from the reader, or if you want to open up a copy so you can see it full screen, well, that's what I have right here. And this was written by his wife, Coretta Scott King, talking about the events that basically got the civil rights movement started. So please open up your own copy, read along with me, and we'll finish this up. Anybody needs a copy, if their computer's not working right, message me, I'll send you a PDF. All right, let's get started. Montgomery Boycott by Coretta Scott King. Of all the facets of segregation in Montgomery, the most degrading were the rules of the Montgomery City bus lines. This northern-owned corporation outdid the South itself. Although 70% of its passengers were black, it treated them like cattle. Worse than that, for nobody insults a cow. The first seats on all buses were reserved for whites, even if they were unoccupied and the rear seats crowded. Negroes would have to stand at the back in case some whites might get aboard. And if the front seats happened to be occupied and more white people boarded the bus, black people seated in the rear were forced to get up and give them their seats. Furthermore, and I don't think Northerners ever realized this, Negroes had to pay their fares at the front of the bus, get off, and walk to the rear door to board again. So imagine how you would feel if you went to the front, you paid your fare, you're walking to the back, and they drive off and leave you behind. Ridiculous. Sometimes the bus would drive off without them after they had paid their fare. This would happen to elderly people or pregnant women in bad weather or good, and was considered a great joke by the drivers. Frequently, the white bus drivers abused their passengers, called them names. Imagine what it was like, for example, for a black man to get on a bus with his son and be subjected to such treatment. There had been one incident in March 1955 when 15-year-old Claudette Colvin refused to give up her seat to a white passenger. The high school girl was handcuffed and carted off to the police station. At that time, Martin served on a committee to protest to the city and bus officials. The committee was received politely, and nothing was done. The fuel that finally made that slow-burning fire blaze up was an almost routine incident. On December 1st, 1955, Mrs. Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old seamstress whom my husband aptly described as a charming person with a radiant personality, boarded a bus to go home after a long day working and shopping. The bus was crowded, and Mrs. Parks found a seat at the beginning of the Negro section. At the next stop, more whites got on. The driver ordered Mrs. Parks to give her seat to a white man who boarded. This meant that she would have to stand all the way home. Rosa Parks was not in a revolutionary frame of mind. She had not planned to do what she did. Her cup had run over. As she said later, "I was just plain tired, and my feet hurt." So she sat there, refusing to get up. The driver called a policeman, who arrested her and took her to the courthouse. From there, Mrs. Parks called E.D. Nixon, who came down and signed a bail bond for her. Mr. Nixon was a fiery Alabamian. He was a Pullman porter who had been active in Philip Randolph's Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and in civil rights activities, right? So he worked for the railroad. Suddenly, he also had had enough. Suddenly, it seemed almost every Negro in Montgomery had had enough. It was spontaneous combustion. Phones began ringing all over the Negro section of the city. The Women's Political Council suggested a one-day boycott of the buses as a protest. E.D. Nixon courageously agreed to organize it. The first we knew about it was when Mr. Nixon called my husband early in the morning of Friday, December 2nd. He had already talked to Ralph Abernathy. After describing the incident, Mr. Nixon said, "We have taken this type of thing too long. I feel the time has come to boycott the buses. It's the only way to make the white folks see that we will not take this sort of thing any longer." Martin agreed with him and offered the Dexter Avenue Church as a meeting place. After much telephoning, a meeting of black ministers and civic leaders was arranged for that evening. Martin said later that as he approached his church Friday evening, he was nervously wondering how many leaders would really turn up. To his delight, Martin found over 40 people, representing every segment of Negro life, crowded into the large meeting room at Dexter. There were doctors, lawyers, businessmen, federal government employees, union leaders, and a great many ministers. The latter were particularly welcome, not only because of their influence, but because it meant that they were beginning to accept Martin's view that religion deals with both heaven and earth. Any religion that professes to be concerned with the souls of men and is not concerned with the slums that doom them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them, is a dry as dust religion. From that very first step, the Christian ministry provided the leadership of our struggle as Christian ideals were its source. And let's stop and think about that for a moment, right? If you're Christian, you have that mindset of, in heaven, we're all going to be happy, right? But what about now? What about our lives today? Should we wait until we're dead to feel that things are fair and we're treated well? I don't think so, right? And that's the point Dr. King was making there. Let's continue on. Martin told me after he got home that the meeting was almost wrecked because questions or suggestions from the floor were cut off. However, after a stormy session, one thing was clear. However much they differed on details, everyone was unanimously for a boycott. It was set for Monday, December 5th. Committees were organized. All the ministers present promised to urge their congregations to take part. Several thousand leaflets were printed on the church mimeograph machine, describing the reasons for the boycott and urging all Negroes not to ride buses to work, to town, to school, or any place on Monday, December 5th. Everyone was asked to come to a mass meeting at the Holt Street Baptist Church on Monday evening for further instructions. The Reverend A.W. Wilson had offered his church because it was larger than Dexter and more convenient being in the center of the Negro district. Saturday was a busy day for Martin and the other members of the committee. They hustled around town talking with other leaders, arranging with the Negro-owned taxi companies for special bulk fares, and with the owners of private automobiles to get people to and from work. I could do little to help because Yoki was only 2 weeks old, and my physician, Dr. W.D. Pettis, who was very careful, advised me to stay in for a month. However, I was kept busy answering the telephone, which rang continuously, and coordinating from that central point the many messages and arrangements. Our greatest concern was how we were going to reach the 50,000 Black people of Montgomery, no matter how hard we worked. The white press, in an outraged expose, spread the word for us in a way that would have been impossible with only our own resources. As it happened, a white woman found one of our leaflets, which her Negro maid had left in the kitchen. The irate woman immediately telephoned the newspapers to let the white community know what the blacks were up to. We laughed a lot about this, and Martin later said that we owed them a great debt. On Sunday morning, from their pulpits, almost every Negro minister in town urged people to honor the boycott. Martin came home late Sunday night and began to read the morning paper. The long articles about the proposed boycott accused the NAACP of planting Mrs. Parks on the bus. She had been a volunteer secretary for the Montgomery chapter, and likened the boycott to the tactics of the white citizens' councils. This upset Martin. That awesome conscience of his began to gnaw at him, and he wondered if he were doing the right thing. Alone in his study, he struggled with the question of whether the boycott method was basically unchristian. Certainly it could be used for unethical ends, but as he said, we were using it to give birth to freedom and to urge men to comply with the law of the land. Our concern was not to put the bus company out of business, but to put justice in business. He recalled Thoreau's words, "We can no longer lend our cooperation to an evil system." And he thought, he who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. Later, Martin wrote, "From this moment on, I conceived of our movement as an act of massive non-cooperation. From then on, I rarely used the word boycott." Serene after his inner struggle, Martin joined me in our sitting room. We wanted to get to bed early, but Yoki began crying, and the telephone kept ringing. Between interruptions, we sat together talking about the prospects for the success of the protest. We were both filled with doubt. Attempted boycotts had failed in Montgomery and other cities. Because of changing times and tempers, this one seemed to have a better chance, but it was still a slender hope. We finally decided that if the boycott was 60% effective, we would be doing all right, and we would be satisfied to have a good start. A little after midnight, we finally went to bed, but at 5:30 the next morning, we were up and dressed again. The first bus was due at 6 o'clock at the bus stop, just outside our house. We had coffee and toast in the kitchen. Then I went into the living room to watch. Right on time, the bus came, headlights blazing through the December darkness, all lit up inside. I shouted, "Martin! Martin! Come quickly!" He ran in and stood beside me, his face lit with excitement. There was not one person on that usually crowded bus. We stood together waiting for the next bus. It was empty too, and this was the most heavily traveled line in the whole city. Bus after empty bus paused at the stop and moved on. We were so excited we could hardly speak coherently. Finally, Martin said, "I'm going to take the car and see what's happening other places in the city." He picked up Ralph Abernathy and they cruised together around the city. Martin told me about it when he got home. Everywhere it was the same. A few white people and maybe one or two blacks in otherwise empty buses. Martin and Ralph saw extraordinary sights. The sidewalks crowded with men and women trudging to work. The students of Alabama State College walking or thumbing rides. Taxi cabs with people clustered in them. Some of our people rode mules. Others went in horse-drawn buggies. But most of them were walking. Some making a round trip of as much as 12 miles. Martin later wrote, "As I watched them, I knew that there is nothing more majestic than the determined courage of individuals willing to suffer and sacrifice for their freedom and dignity." Martin rushed off again at 9 o'clock that morning to attend the trial of Mrs. Parks. She was convicted of disobeying the city segregation ordinance and fined $10 in costs. Her young attorney, Fred D. Gray, filed an appeal. It was one of the first clear-cut cases of a Negro being convicted of disobeying the segregation laws. Usually the charge was disorderly conduct or some such thing. The leaders of the movement called a meeting for 3 o'clock in the afternoon to organize the mass meeting to be held that night. Martin was a bit late, and as he entered the hall, people said to him, "Martin, we've elected you to be our president. Will you accept?" Okay, we're on the third paragraph of page 4. You're going to find out more information of how the civil rights movement got started. Some wonderful quotes from Dr. King. So please continue reading to the end. And if you have thoughts to add to our discussion, please do. And we'll talk again in a little bit.